Hello everyone and everyone watching online. Thank you for joining us to mark World Consumer Rights Day, which occurs annually on the 15th of March. Consumer Rights Day has officially been celebrated since 1983, but it actually traces its origins back to 1962 to a speech delivered by JFK introducing the concept of 4 fundamental consumer rights: the right to safety, the right to be informed, the right to choose, and the right to be heard. This year, Standards Australia wish to use our platform to draw attention to how we and our volunteers and members can support and connect with the public and actual consumers of the products that our standards are designed to cater for. I am privileged to be joined by 3 of the most experienced and dedicated professionals that our Standards Australia community has to offer. Kareen Riley-Takos, the Chief Operating Officer here at SA, Clare McGrath, the Senior Manager of SA's International Engagement, and Teresa Corbin, Chief Customer Officer at Telstra and Chair of Standards Australia's dedicated Committee on Consumer Policy. Ladies, welcome and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. Teresa, I'd like to start with a question for you if I could. You're our consumer advocate, our consumer rep here today. You've spent a big chunk of your career in organisations that protect consumer rights. How important is having these independent organisations?
They're really important because they play a role in civic society that actually gives voice to a lot of people that wouldn't otherwise have a voice. And they also bring together a lot of different issues and concern groups that may not otherwise even work together. And so because of that, they also build expertise about the regulation, about what consumer rights are and how they relate to the products and services that companies are offering. And then, of course, if something isn't really right, then they can actually give a voice to that and they can really hone in and hopefully get some better social change and also some change to the regulations and even improve the services much faster than if we had those consumer organisations.
Okay, and you've spent time at these volunteer organisations in the past. You've now taken up the role of Chief Customer Advocate of one of Australia's biggest and well-known companies. What does a day in that role look like for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's actually not that different from my previous role because the role is created to be independent and of all the business units in the company. So I don't get a bonus. And I also have to speak directly to the board and the CEO. So it's a very high level. So from the perspective of being able to have access to information I didn't have before, I actually get more of an opportunity to influence things before they actually have perhaps a negative impact on customers. And so from that perspective, I get to look under the bonnet. I get to see things I couldn't see before. So I really enjoy that. But ultimately, the role is still the same. I speak up for vulnerable customers. I speak up when I think something isn't right. And I also, although I'm not really focused on individual complaints, I focus on systemic issues. I play a big role in educating those in the company about what's fair, what's inclusive, what's more accessible, what would be perhaps a better way to do something that isn't just better for the customer, but actually has a return for the business. And so that's the only difference, is that now I'm actually thinking, okay, what's the business case here? How can I actually justify it? And how can I get into that motivation and get them to change for that reason, rather than that they've got social pressure or government pressure or regulatory pressure?
Yeah, right. Okay. Now, Kareen, you're CEO of Standards Australia. How important is the consumer perspective in our standards development?
Well, as the national standards body, our mission is to empower communities. And when we think about the communities that we serve, we really want to ensure that they're represented within our technical committees and our expert base. We go through great lengths to ensure that consumers are represented, because if you think about all the standards that we develop, whether they are in kind of consumer safety area or more broadly on infrastructure, building and construction, electrical, they have an impact to consumers. And ensuring that we do have a very strong consumer voice within our technical committees ensures that our products are safe, they perform well, and there is broad information for consumers as a whole.
And what steps do we take to actually make sure we've got that consumer voice in our standards process?
Yeah, look, it's quite interesting because it starts from very important documents and governance in these organizations. So if you think about it, we are not non-government organization, but we have a MOU with the Australian government, and within that MOU there is a requirement for us to engage with consumers. More broadly, we have a standards development and accreditation committee that is responsible for the entire policy for both standards development and also accreditation of other standards development organizations. And within that committee, we have a representative from consumer interests as well. And that's within the governance of the organization. If you go one step further down in terms of our technical committees and the contributions, we have relationships with Consumer Federation of Australia, Choice, and other consumer advocacy organizations to ensure that we actually have that representation within our technical committees.
Oh, fantastic. Now, Claire, you focus more on the international side, leading much of SA's work on the world stage. How important is consumer participation to ISO?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think very similar to what Kareen said, consumers are front of mind for ISO and all work on standards at the international level for those same reasons. Ensuring that consumer confidence is as important when we go up to the global level, and particularly when we're talking about trade between countries and making sure that exports and imports between those countries are meeting quality standards. So ISO's mission is actually to make lives simpler, faster and better. And that's a real kind of mantra for the organisation. So they're really looking at bringing that consumer perspective in at the international standards development level, both at the technical level, but also on a policy level as well.
Now, part of ISO's commitment to consumers includes the Committee on Consumer Policy, or COPOLCO.
Yep.
Can you explain how that works? What standards does COPOLCO develop?
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to the technical committees that develop standards on products and services, we have the Consumer Policy Committee, COPOLCO, which looks at kind of the broad horizontal aspects of the consumer perspective. So COPOLCO identifies the most important areas for consumer participation and provides advice on those particular areas. COPOLCO is also responsible for producing guides for standards developers. So one recent guide was developed by them for a guide on bringing the consumer perspective into service standards. So then technical committees looking at creating service standards can really take into account that consumer perspective. In addition, COPOLCO also provides a lot of resources to the International Standards community, including by providing some training and resources on how to make sure that that consumer perspective is really centralised in the standards development process.
Now, Teresa, you obviously don't have enough to do. In addition to your full-time role at Telstra, you actually chair SA's National Mirror Committee for ISO's COPOLCO committee. Can I ask you, what drew you to this role? You're already doing so much, but it's clearly important to you to have this.
So this obviously started when I was working at ACAN, the Communications Consumer Peak body, and it's carried through from then. So basically the reason that I was really keen on it was because the influence that we have in Australia is specifically that. However, we're all living in a global community, aren't we? So ultimately, if you really want to have influence, you have to try and influence on the global stage. And standards really give you the opportunity to do that. And so we've had some amazing examples of work in Australia on the complaint handling standard, unit pricing, the things that we pioneered that actually have then gone international. And obviously there's other things that we've been quite interested in too that are in train at the moment that may well develop into some better developments across the whole world, not just Australia. And likewise, when we see what's going on overseas, we can jump on and learn a bit more and then use those to influence what's happening in Australia, which I actually think sometimes is absolutely the way to go, particularly when you think about the fact we're mostly a standards taker or a product taker. Most things are built and developed overseas. And so particularly when you're talking about ICT and communications, which is where I started off in my consumer life as a consumer representative, then you really need to be engaging in those forums. There's a really active international consumer movement through Consumers International, and they're very active in standards in ISO. And so it's a great way for us to link in with those international consumer groups who are often fighting the same battles. And you can actually find ways to share information and actually be more effective, and ultimately look at trying to get the industry side to the table, because it's one thing to fight a battle to get a regulatory change or to get a standard in place, but if you can influence those that are actually providing the services from the start, then actually you can end up with a much better outcome. And it's probably my work on standards that really taught me that if I went to the coalface, I could actually get more changes, and probably encouraged me to actually work for a corporate, which was something that was never really part of my plan. So, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Now, Kareen, it's been a big couple of years for everyone. There's a lot's obviously happened around the world. But are there any particular publications, standards that have come out in recent memory that you think are of particular interest to consumers?
Look, it's a really hard one to pick, Ben, because as I said before, I think most of the work that we do will have an impact on consumers down the track, right? I've just recently had a small renovation in my bathroom, and I kept on thinking throughout the whole thing, waterproofing. We all know it's one of the biggest, defects that it's encountered in the building and construction sector, and you can think of it from a building and construction perspective and the cost, but ultimately impacts household owners, and it's awful. So that, in my mind, is a really big one. There's one that's coming up. It's not published yet. It will be going out for public consultation, and that's safety of children in the metaverse. Again, as a mum, that my kids are constantly playing video games. Yeah. I really am looking forward to that publication when the time comes. And it comes back to this point as well. We want to make sure that people can actually comment, and even if they're not participating in the standards development process, providing their feedback. But I could sit here and talk about many others, Ben. There are plenty.
And for those people who really can't just participate in a standards committee, you mentioned before that there's ways for them to contribute. What other ways can consumers engage with our products?
Yeah, look, we do run as part of our standards development process, we have a public comment period, which is open to anyone that would like to review what's being said in the standard, to provide us some feedback. And that is something that we really welcome, because again, if we're going to serve all the communities that we're here to serve, we want to make sure that we're incorporating all of that feedback. We also run general forums and a lot of kind of webinars explaining the content of our standards. And recently, Ben, this is a great plug, we launched our reader room, which is for personal, household, non-commercial access to Australian standards. We've known for a long time that people find it really objectionable that if they have a builder come into their house and they just want to check a standard and ensure that someone is doing the right thing, that they would actually have to pay for that access. Through Standards Australia Reader Room, they can actually have access to the standard and no costs. Again, it's for non-commercial use, but it's exactly for those use cases.
Yeah, look, it's a great product, that Reader Room. Now, Claire, from an ISO lens as well, what's the best way for consumers to get involved at an ISO level, and what are some of the key issues that ISO is focused on right now from a consumer lens?
Yeah, great question. So very much like as Kareen was saying, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved directly into the standards development work, participating on our technical committees. A lot of those technical committees mirror work that's happening at the international level. So that's another way to kind of get directly involved. As Teresa was mentioning, it's really important to kind of have a seat at the table, be at that coal face of decision making. So that's a real opportunity there. We also have our public consultation, but also there's a lot of information online. So on the ISO website, on the Standards Australia website, you can find out a lot about what's happening, what's coming down the pipeline, and keep an ear to the ground whether you want to be participating actively, submitting those public comments, or even putting forward a proposal if there's a new standard you're aware of that you'd like to see adopted in Australia. I also take a lot of their lead from Kapolco on some of those key issues, and I'm sure that Teresa can add more to that, but some of the key issues that are being called out at the last annual meeting, developing a best practice framework on consumer detriment, in strategies for ensuring diversity and inclusion as a key factor in identifying consumer priorities, also deploying tools and technology to address those consumer priorities, and strengthening collaboration. I think it's really important that we hear from all key stakeholders and really kind of hear from advocacy groups, enforcement agencies, regulators and governments alike. So that's all what's happening at ISO, but I'm sure Teresa could probably add to that as well.
Well, that's exciting times.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Teresa, this video goes out on Consumer Rights Day. Look, there are countless issues we could discuss, and Claire's alluded to some of them as well.
Yeah.
Consumers International this year in particular has called out fair and responsible AI for consumers into focus.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about the challenges and opportunities of AI. You can't really turn the TV on anymore without hearing all about AI.
Yeah.
From your angle, how do you see it affecting consumers, and what can we do from a consumer protection angle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time in standards circles. And obviously, Standards Australia was a leader by doing a roadmap for AI really early on. But a lot of those conversations have really been about ethics, less about safety, but in a safety context. And so, generally speaking, when I come up with a new technology or a new product, the first thing I think about is those UN consumer rights that you mentioned at the beginning of this panel, the 8 consumer rights, and just sort of judge things and what sort of questions might come up in relation to those. So safety, safety by design is a really clear one. Privacy by design, security by design all fit underneath that. The right to be informed, so transparency and visibility about what's going on. And also the other one is, of course, the right to redress. And if you don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes, how can you really know if you even should complain? And so there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, fit underneath these that actually take it further than just ethical AI. And I think that, you know, we're starting to talk about what's responsible AI, which is another step further. But also regulators are now talking about, well, how could we actually use AI to be better regulators? And providers are talking about, well, how do we actually use AI to provide better services? So it's not just about, you know, being more efficient or saving time or money to deliver services, but how can we actually build better services? So there's a whole lot of angles to AI that are positive, not just negative, that I think we need to be open to. But the key, most important thing out of all of this, once again, is being able to be at the table, discussing those developments, understanding those developments, playing around with things like ChatGPT gives us a window of opportunity to go, oh, actually, I do understand this. It's not magic. It's just another technology that I need to learn about. And the biggest concern from me is that we're going to see another divide, another digital divide, another level of digital divide of people who are AI proficient, people who understand AI, people who can engage in a world confidently that is AI influenced and driven, but also people that aren't. And what kinds of protections are we going to put in place to make sure that we're not leaving those customers and those consumers behind? Because they will be impacted by these services. And if we're not careful, that could be negative. So yeah, I guess I think it's, once again, just we've got to be at the table. We've got to educate ourselves about what does a large language model mean? You know, what is this magic called AI? How does it relate to my life? And it may well be that, you know, the next consumer rep might come up with the next great idea for AI. So let's not be closed to it, but let's also open the doors to let consumers be at the table about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. So look, that's probably all of my questions before we wrap up. Does anyone have any questions for anyone else?
I think I'm just curious as to whether, Teresa, you have seen any areas where not having consumers at a table have been detrimental, and if you can talk about that.
I mean, I think there are examples of this, but one of the ones that I, in recent memory, that is probably the most horrendous is button batteries. And once again, Australia has played a critical role internationally in getting this changed. So basically, you could put out a product that you didn't have to undo a screw or anything. You could just basically release the button battery really easily. And if you're a child playing with a toy, it broke really easily, then you might swallow that battery. And, you know, we all know we've got them lying around the house, a lot of us. I'll save that, I might use it for something else. And you put it somewhere. Well, unfortunately, that's led to diabolical consequences for some children who have passed away or got actually life-lasting injuries from swallowing these batteries. And so if we had been at the table when we were developing some standards about that, then maybe we would have had better child tampering proof, you know, requirements that we do have now. And I have to say, my kids are sick of me going on about it, but whenever we go to buy something and it's got a button battery in it, because I'm always like, if it's got a button battery and it's not looked after properly, we're not buying it. But I'm really pleased that more and more I'm buying stuff where I go, hey, look at this. You actually need a screwdriver to release that button battery. So, and that's an example of went bad, but we fixed it.
Yeah, but the whole purpose really is that ensuring that consumers are sitting at the table so that doesn't happen
exactly
in future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the message is pretty clear. The consumer's perspective is vitally important. There's many ways to get involved, and we encourage, I guess, anyone who has an interest in it to reach out and contact us and find any way that they can to get involved. So, ladies, thank you again for your time today. Hopefully we'll have a fantastic Consumer Protection Day and look forward to continue working with you on this important issue.
Yeah, happy Consumer Rights Day.
Thank you.